Today is the 26th of March, 2012. My name is Wayne Clark. We are at the New York State Military Museum and Veterans Research Center, Saratoga Springs, New York. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and date and place of birth, please?
My name is James H. Shaw. My birth is 28 February 1924. I was born in Schenectady, New York.
Did you attend school in Schenectady?
I graduated from Terrace High School in 1941.
After you graduated, did you go on to any schooling or college or go right to work?
No, I went to work for a little bit for the American Locomotive Company when I was a young kid, 18 years old. And they really didn't have a working job that was good for me. And then I left there and went to work at GE, and their conditions for young people was worse than anything, worse than being in the military. And at that particular time, of course, we had the Pearl Harbor started off. And
yes, let me ask you about that. Do you remember where you were and what you were doing when you heard about the attack?
That was Sunday afternoon. I was home and I heard about it in the living room. And at that time, of course, all the young kids, a lot of the young kids decided they were going to go gung-ho, get in the service. And my good buddy of mine, he wanted to join the Marine Corps, in which he did. And I wanted to join to go with him, but my age, I wasn't old enough for me to get the okay from my mother, and so I didn't go in. But my mother was a World War II bride, World War I bride, I should say. My father served in France at that battle. And they were both knew about wars, and they didn't want me to go in. And I stayed out of the service till around November of '42, when I got my draft papers to fill out, and I knew what was coming next. So instead of filling out the paperwork, I enlisted in the Air Corps, and I wanted to be an airplane mechanic.
Had you ever flown in an airplane before?
No, no. But like the military, after I did basic training,
Where'd you go for basic training?
you'll love this, I did my basic training in Miami Beach, Florida, which in those days they took up every hotel and whatever accommodations to put people into basic training. After basic training, I got on a troop train and I headed north, which out of Miami you got to go north on a train. And I think I'm coming back to Schenectady, or close by Schenectady. But 5 days later, 5 nights, 5 days later, I'm in California, New York, waiting for assignment there. Then I found out that I was no longer in the Air Corps. I was now assigned to the Signal Corps. With that, I needed some training, so they sent me from there to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to become a radio operator mechanic, which I graduated from those courses.
How did you get out there? By train?
By train. I had a lot of train time.
And what was your training like?
Well, as a mechanic, we used to make radios and understand radios, from building one to understanding how they worked. And from the communications part of it, the signal, the code training.
Did you have to learn Morse code?
I had to learn Morse code. And we were so busy that we went to school in the evening because they were pushing people fast in those days. Now, as I said before, I was in the Signal Corps, and I understood that after I finished the mechanic operator school, that I would go back to California into the 957th Signal Radio Intelligence Company for assignment. But at that particular time in history, World War II, the B-17s and the aircrafts in Europe were taking a big beating from the Japanese. And they were losing something, in some days, 60 airplanes in a day, which is 600 guys a day.
You mean through the Germans?
Yeah, they got shot down or whatever.
Mhm.
And now they needed aerial gunners real bad.
Mhm.
So now no longer am I assigned to the signal, I'm back in the Air Corps, and I shipped to Laredo, Texas to become an aerial gunner.
What was Laredo, Texas like?
It was hot. But it was good training. It was, again, we learned a 50 caliber machine gun inside and outside, and we did some nice flying in the airplane up there flying, shooting at the targets flown up alongside of us. And of course,
Now, what kind of aircraft were you flying on?
well, I can't remember. I think it was AT-6s, I think. I don't know. I didn't.
Oh, I see. So you were sitting in the back seat with the...
I was sitting in the back seat, strapped in, two-seaters.
Uh-huh.
It makes me laugh again here because as we flew along, we were firing at these targets that were being towed, and they had a mirror on us, the pilot, because when we finished shooting, we knew it, and we must have had some kind of experience, expression in our face. And at that time, as soon as he knew we were done, he would do a lip around and turn over and do a big swoop down to the ground. And we're only strapped in by our parachute, the straps in our parachute.
Uh-huh.
And of course, now we ended up with that kind of training, and I graduated from that school. And then I ended up, went home for some leave time, very little of it. Then I was sent to Salt Lake City, Utah for assignment for a crew. And at that location, we met our pilot, we met the rest of the gunners and stuff like that. And after we married up with those people, we had to go, we were sent to El Paso, Texas for crew training. And we flew B-24s, and we went to all aspects of night flying, navigator problems, gunnery training as a crew member.
Mm-hmm.
And when we completed all that training, we had to be deployed.
Now, let me ask you this. You were assigned as a gunner, and with that crew, what was your position? Were you waist gunner, tail gunner?
My position was a radio operator gunner.
Okay.
And I fired a waist position 99% of the times. I had some occasions in combat to fly other positions, but mostly because of my position as a radio operator. And the other waist guy was the engineer of the crew, and it gave us the flexibility to get to where we had to be without being into a turret.
Okay.
Now see where I leave off. So now we're going to be deployed. We got back on the train, and we ended up being now we're in Miami. And we have no idea where we're going. They put us in a hotel up on the 6th floor, I remember that. And the enlisted people could not come out at night. We had to stay in because they didn't tell us what was going on. And later, early in the morning, one morning, we got called and we had to go to the airport. And we left Miami in the C-47s, and we flew down towards South America. We went to Trinidad and other places on the way to Brazil. We got down and we stayed a couple of nights here and there because we didn't have the distance. In Brazil, we waited there until they came up with a 4-engine aircraft to take us across the ocean. And we left Brazil, and we landed halfway across the ocean at Osage Island. It's a little dot in the map. And we landed there for refill. And actually, that spot was the British used that during some of their wars down South America. But after we left there, we refueled and we flew over to Africa. At that time, it was called the Gold Coast of Africa. And we got rid of that big airplane and we went back to the smaller aircraft, 2 inches, either 46 or 47s. And later on,
Now, did you go a single plane, or was there a group of planes that went?
no, we went single,
Okay,
and our group was in the airplane.
okay.
So from, after we got to Africa, we started our trip across Africa to get to our destination. And we made a few stops all the way over. We ended up going all the way across Africa over to Pakistan. Karachi, Pakistan is now Pakistan. It used to be India at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So we got there, and then we proceeded to go across India. We got near Calcutta, and we got to our unit there at Panabeswar, India, which is about 150 miles from Calcutta. When we got there, one of the things we found out, because the monsoons was coming on, that we couldn't drop bombs anymore, so they moved the entire unit up to Kurmatola, India, which is now Bangladesh. And we were stationed up there in Kurmatola till the end of the monsoon. But what we did there is they put bladders in the Bombay tank, airplanes in the Bombays, and we flew gas over to China, over the hump. It was about a 5.5 hour trip over, and then we had to fly back. And sometimes we were able to go even further into China, and then we would stay overnight in Kunming. That's where we took our gas.
Any contact with the enemy at all?
No, we were down low enough in India that we were ready to fight. We had all the crew was there. Machine guns were all open and ready, but we didn't run across any at that time.
Now, what was your living conditions like there? Were you living in tents or barracks, or?
Well, in Kurmatola we lived in tents,
Mm-hmm.
and the monsoon is nothing but water. As a matter of fact, they had wood walkways so you could get to the airplane. And on the airstrip itself, they had metal mats for you can land for concrete bases. So we stayed there until after the monsoons, and then we flew that entire outfit back down to Panabeswar, which then was our home near Calcutta.
Now, what time frame was this?
Well, I can't give you exact.
This was 1940.
This is 1944.
1944. Okay.
So after we got back to the home base there, we had to begin. Now we had to retrain again, getting ready for combat bombing trips.
Mm-hmm.
And we did all the navigators and all this stuff, the training. Then we started our combat missions, and we flew into Burma. Rangoon was a favorite. Mandalay was another one. And then we did our time, and that was my last mission. I went down to Thailand, and that mission was my last mission. And we had covered that we put in two gas tanks in the bladders again into the Bombays, and we took 4 bombs, and we flew down to Thailand, which was a 2,700-mile trip, and we were in the air 17.5 hours, and we flew home, and that was my last combat mission.
How many missions did you fly?
I had over 50, but we didn't go so much by missions. We went by hours, and my hours I had was 457 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Another story about that, my co-pilot, all the officers stayed back, and the 6 sergeants left to come home. And my last mission was on the 19th of March, 1945. And my co-pilot got his own crew before I left there. As a matter of fact, my last mission, he flew with me on that mission. And I'll put this out, my last mission, the tail number was number 24. Just keep that, that'll come back in a minute. Now, after we left, we were on our way home, and the co-pilot had his own crew. We found out that on the 29th of March that month, Chuck got shot down over Rangoon. And we figured that he was captured, because we couldn't find the body, and we thought he had gone in the ocean, which was pretty close to the ocean. Some 50 years later, I saw across his niece, run across her through a newsletter, and I asked her about, mentioned the fact that her uncle had got shot down and was in the water, and she said that was not true. He got shot down and he was captured. I mentioned the number. I find out that the number that he went down in was number 24, tail number 24, the same number that I flew on my last mission.
Mm-hmm.
Now, after we researched and found out about Charles Wiley is the co-pilot's name, we got the investigation from the military about what happened. And they had evidence, and I still have that at home, that he was captured, where he was captured, and what they had done with him. And the local people had turned him over and his crew over to the Japanese. And the Japanese took him to Rangoon, Burma, which happened to be the target that he got shot down at. Now, on the 14th of April of 1945, the British took over Rangoon, but they couldn't find any bodies. And on the paperwork from the Water Department, it says that possible assassination, which we figured this is what happened to him. So then we got back home. Some of the stuff I had mentioned before, but anyway, I had leave time at Atlantic City. They gave us R&R time there, and we got reassignment. So then I was sent back into service, active into Laredo, Texas, as a B-29 gunnery instructor. And I completed that training, and we were ready for deployment, which because we were only guaranteed 6 months in-house, in country before our next assignment. And then we, after completing that, I was sent to Topeka, Kansas, waiting for reassignment in a B-29 position, and then the war ended.
Okay. Let me just go back a little bit. Where were you when you heard about the death of President Roosevelt?
I was in Schenectady. I was home on leave at that particular time, and matter of fact, I was driving up near Amsterdam, and the word came out that he had gotten, he died.
Was that a shock to you to hear about the?
Oh yeah, it sure was, because even though the politics of the thing, he was the president. As far as we know, he was good.
Now, where were you when the war in Europe ended?
I think I was still in New York.
Okay.
I'd have to refresh the numbers, the dates, but I think that's where I was. Then when the Japanese thing ended up, I was in Topeka, Kansas.
Let me just also go back. I wanted to ask you, when you were in India, did you fly the same aircraft most of the time?
No. We never flew the same one every day. We didn't have an assigned airplane.
Okay.
Because we had more crews than we had the bombers.
Now, most of your bombers, were they named? Did they have any kind of artwork on them, or?
Oh, Oh, they had a lot of artwork on them.
Mm-hmm.
So I told my wife just the other day, says, that's what keep us going. You know, look at naked women inside of airplanes. In fact, I have a book in my collection of nose art of all the aircraft that they had done.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's a morale booster.
Sure. Now, you said you had flown about 50 missions. During any of those missions, any contact with the Japanese?
We used to, we ran across some fighters occasionally, but most of it was flak anti-aircraft that we were dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Was your aircraft ever hit?
We had some hit, little, not much of anything, as I remember my engineer was taking a camera shot over the bottom of the aircraft with a camera trap, and he was leaning over the aircraft, or over the camera taking the pictures, and the flak hit the side of the airplane, and not much, but right across his back. So.
But was he wounded at all?
No.
No.
No, we didn't get wounded.
Now, you mentioned you were part of the 10th Air Force?
The 10th Air Force, and I was assigned to the 9th Bomb Squadron, 7th Bomb Group,
Mm-hmm.
which incidentally, that outfit was the oldest Air Force unit in the country. 7th Bomb Group was went back all the way over to World War I.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned training on the B-29. What was your opinion of that aircraft?
Well, it was pretty exotic compared to what we had used for years.
Mm-hmm.
And we just trained it. We never did actually put it into any action. So I think the biggest part of that whole thing was that glad when it ended, because we didn't have to go back.
Okay. Once the war ended, what happened to you next?
Well, excuse me, but we wait around doing nothing like the military does,
Mm-hmm.
and finally I had enough points to be sent home and be discharged, and I took by train again, and I went to Rome, New York, the process and location there, and when that happened, I was put on a train station and took to Schenectady, and I was out of the service.
Did you make use of the GI Bill or the 5220 Club?
Well, 5220 Club was, that's how we lived,
Mm-hmm.
because that's how we were able to have fun, you know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I forgot to ask you, what was your rank when you were discharged?
I was a tech sergeant.
Okay. And did you use the GI Bill at all?
No,
Okay.
no. See, the problem I had, when I went to high school, things were such in my family that I didn't think I'd ever get to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
And I took, if you want to use the easy way through high school, a general course, I did that. So I felt, which was foolish, I felt as though I didn't have the credits to go to college,
Mm-hmm.
which now I thought about it since then in all those years, that I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do that, but I did find without the college.
Okay. Now, you mentioned in 1949 you ended up joining the National Guard. How did that come about?
I used to work for a fella down on near Erie Boulevard, and he belonged to the National Guard, an infantry outfit in Schenectady. And of course, always time you talk about guys and what they're doing, he wanted me to join. And he said, sign up for 1 year, which was a big way to do it. Try for 1 year, and then if you didn't like it, drop out. So I talked to my wife, and let's see, at that time, we had one child. And of course, after being in the service, you had itchy feet about the service. You enjoy being with guys and all that. So I went for that 1 year thing.
Mm-hmm.
But after the first year, I was ready to, that was it, because there's a big difference with flying airplanes and then walking around the world with boots. So I was going to drop out, and my company commander convinced me to go into the OCS program, which was just starting in New York State, and which I did that. And of course, I got to be an officer. I enjoyed that aspect of things because now I was one of the guys that made decisions and not listen all the time to what somebody else said. And I stayed into the National Guard forever. Started out as a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, and retired as full colonel.
And what year did you retire?
What year? 1979. So I had put in about 38 years service. And that was it, those assignments I had in the National Guard. I had the local training, the low-level officer, platoon leader, maintenance officer, and whatever assignments you had.
You want to mention some of the units you commanded?
Yes. And one of the things I was also assigned one time as the club officer. I had to take care of the club. But as the things progressed, I ended up as being the company commander as a captain of the infantry. And then my next assignment after that, I served on the staff in different various assignments. And then I was made the executive officer of the battalion. And then in 1964, my commander retired, and I was able to take his position. As now, I'm the colonel. I was a major at that time. I was the commander of the unit that I had enlisted a few years before that. Then after 4 years of command of this 105th Infantry, they disbanded the 27th Infantry Division, which at that time was an armored division. They disbanded that, and I had to go. I was sent to Albany to an assignment over at Albany headquarters there. I was the provost officer in that location. And another outfit in Schenectady at that time was the 727 Maintenance Battalion, and that commander of that unit was replaced, and I was sent back to Schenectady as commander of the 727 Maintenance Battalion, which I served in that position for 4 years. Then after that position, I was eligible for 06 position, colonel, and I had to move to another location, and then I was sent to Troy, New York, as I commanded the 205th Support Group, which commanded, I had 4 battalions in that position. I had 2 maintenance battalions, 1 armor battalion, and 1 MP battalion as my assignment throughout the state. Then after that period of time, I was sent over now to replace and sent to Troy to the chief of staff to the higher headquarters. And in those positions, I was able to really be involved in all non-divisional units in the state of New York, which was that extended from Brooklyn to Buffalo and Carthage, wherever, we covered the whole state. So we had units all over, but I was the chief of staff to that unit. And of course, during all this training, I had continued my education with the military. I had gone to, as a company officer course at Fort Benning, Georgia. That was a 4-month course. In 1962, I went to attend back to Fort Benning as a career officer course, which was a 6-month course. And then I went studies at the Command and General Staff College, which was conjunction with the reserve program and field training tours every 4 years. And I completed and graduated from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, I can't give you the dates, but it made me eligible to be promoted to a colonel. And in the meantime, there was all other courses, 2-week courses, and that I attended all those kind of courses. Then when I was in Fort Benning in '62, one of my training was to be a nuclear weapons employment officer. And we were trained in there, part of our regular courses, but that was in part of it. And we were into all secret material that we had to count pages and books, and we had to count empty pages, and we had to account for every piece of paper that we were studying. As a matter of fact, we were locked up into a cage building. I guess they called that Brown Hall is the name of that building. We went into this cage, and no papers in or out. And when you finished the course, they counted every piece of paper that you had, even empty pages, and you destroyed everything that if you had written anything down. So now I was trained to be a nuclear weapons employment officer. So when now you talk about nuclears and stuff like that, I have some background on what I had studied, and of course know what happened to in 1945 with the atomic bomb. I have a good idea what can happen. And you see the latest thing that happened in Japan and other places. That's dangerous stuff.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you maintain a civilian occupation too, or were you full-time military?
No, I worked from 1951. I went to work for Schenectady County. I was a mechanic helper, and then I worked in that position. Then I got to be mechanic, and then I got to be the shop foreman. And then after that, I became the supervisor of automotive repairs. And that was at the same time that I was doing all this other stuff with the military. Pretty busy.
Definitely. Now, did you stay in contact with anyone you were in the active Army Air Force with?
I was in contact with my crew members, and they came from, one fellow was from Long Island, we had somebody from Kansas, the state of Washington, we were all over the country, Missouri and stuff like that. And every Christmas, we always exchanged credit cards, Christmas cards I should say, not credit cards. And so I knew the people. Then when I retired from the military in 1979, we had a retirement party for me over in Albany, and I got the word out to some of those crew members that I was retiring. And the night of my banquet dinner, sat there with the other people in the crowd. And who sat in there with me from out of nowhere was my pilot was there, and my navigator was sitting there.
Wow.
And because we had this exchange at that party, after that they decided that we should have a reunion. Now you remember that we were short one guy now because the co-pilot had passed away. So the 9 of us went to Connecticut from all over, met there in Connecticut to the navigator's home, and we stayed there for a weekend and had a heck of a time of talking. And we had occasion, my wife had met the other wives, and we had a good time. So that was our connection, but we always tried to, if nothing else, a card or a phone company, or a phone call.
Now, did your unit have any reunions, the 10th Air Force, or any?
No, see, that was a different kind of like a ship. They had people that stayed together for years. And we were there for 1 year period of time, and then people would rotate in, the pilot
Yeah.
all crews didn't stay there long enough to get associated with. I knew some of the guys, but never followed up throughout the years. And my connection was with those 9 people or 8 people. But see, the difference is with me is that I was so active with the National Guard side of the house. Now, if you want to talk about friends that I had there, I had a lot there because we were stable unit.
Sure.
We were there for a long period of time.
Now, did you end up joining any veterans organizations?
I belong to the veterans full life member for VFW. I was a life member for Hump, how do they say that?
Hump Crewmen's Association?
Well, yeah, Hump member, that was a lifetime thing, and I was also a life member in the 7th Bomb Group also. But see, all those outfits, like everything else, unless it's a big together, each one of those, the Hump Pilot Association, that's what that was. Slowly but surely, they just dropped off because there weren't enough covers. So all those units, those with the World War II, they're all done away with. Now the VFW, I'm still a life member of VFW, but because I'm so active with my National Guard, I never got involved in a friendly thing with those kind of people. But because those guys, like everything else, they were sailors and Marines and everything else. But I was too busy to do with my civilian job plus the National Guard jobs. I had more than I could handle.
I normally ask, how did your time in the service change or affected your life? Once you left the active service, you went into the National Guard for a very, very long, distinguished career. So do you think that, well, obviously, had you not gone into the active Army during World War II, you probably never would have joined the National Guard, right?
Probably no, probably not. I would not have done that. But the war brought that out, and it changed my life and a lot of other guys' lives for sure. Some good and some bad. But because I had that training, it's always stayed with me. As I even tell my wife, even to this day, I know how to make a bed because in basic training, the first day not basic, reception at Fort Dix, one of the first things they told us is how to make a bed. And the guy, the corporal, said, I'm going to show you how to make this bed, and this is the last time I'm going to show you. But those kind of things is how you are in your life is how you do things. Now you talked about the schooling that I had, and I didn't have the college, and now I find out because I'm in the officer branch serving in schools. I was kind of reluctant to get into that because I didn't have the background for schools, but I found out that I could have done well in college if I had pursued that, because when I got into military schools, a couple of long schools that I attended 4 months and 6 months, I was in the upper third of my corps class, and I competed with National Guard people, reserve people, and also active duty officers in those same courses. So I was able, if I had pursued college, I'm convinced that I could have done all right. But again, I did pretty good as it is, I think.
Definitely. When and where did you meet your wife?
Oh, that's another story. When my wife was training in Ellis Hospital as a nurse, and my wife was a cadet nurse, and the thing was that she was going to, when she finished school, she would go into the Navy as a nurse,
Now, this is during World War II.
World War II.
Okay.
We've been married a long time. So my wife came from near Cooperstown and came to Schenectady. Now, I was gone when she was in that training. But she was, funny part about that whole thing, she was on, she had to go 6 months at a time to different schools. She spent 6 months down in New York to a hospital down there. And then when I just discharged from Rome, New York, my wife so happened to be in a psych hospital up in Rome, New York. And I didn't know her. I hadn't met her till I got home. And when I got home, I met nurses, the student nurses that were pretty nice. And so the day that, the day that my birthday on my, 1946 was my birthday. The student nurses that were around there, they had a party for me at a local pub. And that particular day, my wife came back from Rome, New York on a train, and she got to where she lived. She lived in Union College at that time because they had taken over a whole building for nurses. And she got back to where she lived. She went in to expect she's going to find all her nurse friends, and they weren't there. They were at a party. And the story is between my wife and I is the fact that she found out she didn't even like me at that time because we just kid about that. But because later on I met her and we got married in 1947. And still married.
Mm-hmm. Any children?
We had 2 daughters of our own, and the third daughter is a adopted granddaughter, which is the daughter of my oldest daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So for all intents and purposes, we have 3 daughters and no sons.
Okay. And how many granddaughters?
Just the one that ended up to be my daughter.
Okay. All right.
And she's 40 years old now, so.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't touched on? Any of your military or guard experiences?
No, I don't think so. I just think that the thing I could say in my case, and we mentioned this earlier, how things change your life. Going in the military changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Becoming an officer in the National Guard changes my life. And my daughters will say to you and to anybody else that I'm strict, but I think I'm fair with everybody, because you can't command all the people that I commanded that they didn't have the respect of you.
Mm-hmm.
And life, that works both ways. When we made plans for things, I always thought of the guy on the bottom, the private, because I remember the days that I was the private, and I always said if we have to wait 2 hours for something to happen, why can't we do it in 1 hour? And that was my whole theory.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess by and large, that covers the whole thing.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your interview.
It's my appreciation for, my wife told me to do this for quite a while, and I just kept putting it off, but I guess I finally did it because I talked to you, and we'll do the paperwork, or I'll do the paperwork and get it to you, and we can complete this.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, and thank you for your service.
My pleasure.